Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I've got 9 tips of things that you should never do to your new houseplant when you bring it home from the store. So this is a care guide for your new houseplants to make sure that you start them off in the best possible way when you bring them home. So I've made some mistakes with new houseplants, so I'm going to share those with you so that you don't have to. If you don't follow these 9 tips for your new houseplant when you bring it home, then you might have a plant that stops growing or drops some leaves, so generally an unhappy plant. Like I say, I've had a few plants that I've not treated the way I should have done when I brought them home. One of them eventually ended up dying, so that was a bit of a shame. So if you follow these tips, then this won't happen to you. So tip number 1 begins before you even brought the plant to your home from the shop. It begins in the shop, and that's to not transport your plant naked like this. So if you take it from the shop and you take it home like this and it's cold weather outside, and that's going to send the plant into shock. So you want to make sure that the shop assistant, wherever you're buying the plant, puts it in at least a paper bag or a plastic bag just to protect it from the harshest kind of conditions outside when there's cold temperatures. Also make sure that for those plants that you're buying online that you get swift delivery. You don't want your plant to be lying around in a sorting office, in the post office, where it can get cold. You want it to be sent kind of next day delivery, so that way the plant gets to you as quickly as possible and it's out of the cold as quickly as possible. The reason for this, of course, is that the houseplants that we have in our homes are generally tropical plants, so they naturally live in warm conditions, normally in like a jungle environment where you get warm weather all year round. So if you expose the plants to any sort of period of cold weather, especially if it's snowing outside, and they really don't like that, and you might find that when you bring the home into your house after taking it through the cold weather, then it might inhibit the growth of the plants. A Ficus elastica, for example, is a tropical tree. I think it grows naturally in South America. So if you were to bring that into cold weather from the shop without any form of protection, then it's really not going to like that because it's used to having warm weather, warm conditions. So if you expose it to cold weather, then it's probably going to respond by dropping some leaves, and that won't be a very good look for your new houseplant. Obviously, if it's summer where you are, then there's no real issues with taking your plant home naked to your house. Tip number 2 is to do with pests, and that is to not integrate your houseplant amongst your other houseplants as soon as you bring it home. So when I bring a plant home, like this one, this is a recent purchase for me. I bought this in my local nursery. So what I like to do when I bring a plant home is just keep it away from my other plants. That's just to ensure that any pests that might be lingering on the plant, that you got it from the place where you got it, any pests don't spread to your other house plants. So you want to give it a period of quarantine. So I quarantine my plants for about a week or so. It's not as drastic as it sounds. It just means you put it in a spot in your house that is away from other plants, and then just check on the underside of the leaves and in the soil. Look for any webbing or anything like that for spider mites. Look for fungus gnats in the soil. Just keep doing that for about a week and a half or so. Just make sure there's nothing in there. And then when you're happy that the plant doesn't have any pests that you brought home from the nursery or the shop where you bought it, then you can put it in the place where it's going to end up living, which will probably be amongst other houseplants. I did a recent video on how to deal with fungus gnats. Just check that out in the description, guys. It goes through everything you need to do to identify and to hopefully get rid of fungus gnats in your plants. The 3rd tip is to not repot your new plant as soon as you get it home. Generally when we buy a plant from a shop, we tend to fuss over it because we're a little bit excited about having the new plant. We feel like we need to do lots of things to the plant to kind of look after it, but avoid the temptation to put it into a brand new pot. Generally, the nursery pot that it comes in is sufficient for the plant for the time being, for the first few months of its life. You don't really want to be taking out of that and then putting it into another pot, maybe a bigger pot. That could send the plant into shock and you could end up losing some leaves. Some plants really don't like having their roots disturbed. They like to stay in the same pot for a long time. A Monstera deliciosa, for example, doesn't like to have its roots disturbed that often. So I've got a monstera upstairs in my house that I've had in the same pot for at least 5 years, I think. It's happily thriving, it's still growing new leaves. So my advice here is just to leave it in the nursery pot for a few months at least, just let it settle in its new environment, and then you can check on the roots after that period. If it looks like it's becoming root bound, then you can up pot it into a bigger size. My fourth tip is a continuation of my third tip, and that is to avoid the temptation to divide your plant. So you might have bought a plant from your shop or online, such as a calathea, that generally when you propagate, you do it by division rather than stem cutting or leaf cutting. So you might be tempted to start that process as soon as you bring the plant home and divide it up into separate plants. But like I say with my third tip, if you do that, then that's probably going to send the plant into shock and it's not going to like it. And it might end up going a bit droopy and even dropping some leaves. So to avoid the temptation as far as possible for at least the first few months to avoid disrupting the roots and dividing the plant up into multiple plants. My fifth tip is to not overwater your plants when you bring it home. Like I say, when we bring a new plant home into our homes, we're generally a bit excited. We tend to fuss over it a little bit, feel like we have to do something. And you might be tempted to give it some water when you put it in its new surroundings. Well, this could be quite a problem for the new plant because you haven't really no idea when it was last watered. It could only have been watered a couple of days ago. And if we add water to the soil, then we're going to be overwatering it and the roots may start to rot. And we don't want that with our new house plants. So when you bring it home, just give the soil a good check to see if it is in fact dry. It probably won't be dry because your nursery will be looking after it appropriately. So when I bring a plant home from my local nursery, I use my moisture meter. I'll stick it into the center of my pot, the new plant pot. And if it's dry, then I'll give it a water, but more often than not, it's already moist, so I just leave it be. If you water your plant too early, then obviously that's going to create a nice moist soil, and that could also bring in fungus gnats. Fungus gnats like a nice moist soil, so they can come in and lay their eggs, and you could have a problem with fungus gnats in your new houseplant. It's also a really good idea to just do a bit of research on the new plant that you have bought. So this is a new Hoya that I bought, and before I kind of did anything with it, I just did a little bit of research on Google, maybe watched a couple of YouTube videos on what this particular Hoya prefers. It doesn't like to have wet feet like most houseplants do, so I'm going to allow the soil to dry out in between waterings like I do with most of my plants. A Ficus elastica, for example, really doesn't like having wet feet, so allow that to dry out thoroughly in between waterings. Whereas a plant like a calathea doesn't really appreciate having dry feet, so you just want to always have some moisture in the soil. Don't let it dry out completely in between waterings. So it's really important to research the plant before we do anything with it. My sixth tip, and it's a really important one, and that is to not fertilize your plant as soon as you bring it home. Again, like I say, we're often very eager to look after our plants and we tend to fuss over it, and you may be tempted to give it a fertilize when you bring it straight home from the shop. So this will be a bad idea because the place where you bought it, a local nursery or a DIY store, or if you bought it online, will have that plant in a fertilizer routine or regime. So basically, when you bring a new plant home, you have no idea when it was last fertilized. It could have been fertilized the day before, and then if you apply fertilizer when you buy it the day after, then that is going to be way too much fertilizer for the plant, and that could really send the plant into shock. And it will tell you by sending out, or by the leaves going yellow. It really won't look like a healthy plant, and it might start to droop as well. My seventh tip is not to just chuck your plants into a place that gets full sun in your house. So you could have a south-facing windowsill, and you might just assume that all plants like lots of light because they like to photosynthesize, obviously. You might just place it into a really direct sun position. That can be a serious problem for a lot of indoor houseplants. They really don't like being in direct sun unless it's a succulent or a jade plant or something like that. They tend to like full sun conditions, but a plant like this, a Hoya, You can certainly scorch the leaves, and you could have a problem if you put your plant in bright direct sunlight. So the thing to do here is just, like I say, research your plants, make sure you know what it likes in terms of light and other things like watering and fertilizer. That way you get a good idea of where you can put it in your house. Like I say, a succulent you can put on a south-facing windowsill and it'll generally do fine. But a plant like a philodendron or pothos doesn't like direct sunlight. So you might want to keep that on maybe an east-facing window or west-facing window out of direct sun. My 8th tip for new houseplants is to not move your plant around too much in your house. Certain houseplants like to stay in a certain position. They get a little bit stressed if you start moving them around too much, and that's particularly the case as you're bringing it home from a shop and you're placing it in your house. It's already stressed in that situation. And then obviously if you're undecided about where to place it, you might start moving it around your house. You might move it from a south-facing room to an east-facing to a west-facing or north-facing room, and the plant won't like that. An example for me, I bought a croton from a shop, and crotons really don't like to be moved around. So I brought it home. I didn't really know what I was doing with it. I didn't really research the plant. So I kept moving it about my house because I wasn't really happy about where I'd placed it. And so it was a really fussy plant, they don't like it. So it started to drop its leaves and eventually ended up dying on me. So it was quite a shock to me. So I always make sure that I research whether a plant doesn't like to be moved around too much. And I always, when I bring it home, I put it in its quarantine place. And after that period, I move it to its spot, and then I just generally try and leave it there as far as possible. My 9th and final tip is to not prune your plants as soon as you bring it home. So you might have got a plant on sale maybe from a local nursery, or you might have just bought a plant that looks a bit unwieldy. You might think it needs a bit of a prune, a few of the leaves cutting off, but that is likely to stress your plant out. If you start cutting away the foliage of the plant, if you cut away too much, then that's going to affect the plant's ability to photosynthesize. So it's really going to send the plant into shock, and you could even end up killing the plant. Cutting away the foliage of the plant before it's had a chance to acclimatize and settle into its new surroundings in your home can really send the plant into shock. So my advice is to just put it in its spot where it's going to end up. Just let it grow, let it be for a few months, maybe 3 or 4 months. And then after that point, if it's still looking a bit unruly, you want to give it a prune, just cut it back, but I probably wouldn't cut back more than 1/3 of the plant, because then otherwise that can really affect the plant's ability to photosynthesize and it really won't be happy. So there you have it, guys. Those are my 9 tips of what not to do when you buy a new house plant and bring it into your home. The big takeaway that I hope you've got from this video is that your house plant will need a period of acclimatization in your house. So it's best to just leave them alone. Let them settle in their new environment and don't make any changes, because that's really going to stress your plant out. So there you go, guys. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it useful to know what you shouldn't do with your new house plant. If you did, then please leave a like on the video, press the thumbs up button. If you like content like this, then please subscribe to the channel. I'm posting about 3 or 4 videos a week. If you have any questions about what I've discussed here today, then do leave it in the comments. I'll reply to that. I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.